Hello, today we'll be reading through multiple articles, but we'll start with the express one. We will never be your slaves! Italy in crisis as thousands demand exit from EU mafia. Thousands of protesters took to the streets yesterday to determine Italy leaves the EU immediately, with march slogans labeling the European bloc as a mafia. Thousands of anti-EU protesters voiced their fury at Brussels yesterday in one of the largest ever demonstrations against the European bloc to take place in Italy. The scale of the protest shocked police officers and even prompted the local US embassy to issue a security alert, warning of up to 10,000 people on the streets. Among the urgent demands of the young protesters was an immediate Italian exit of the EU, as well as a departure from the Eurozone. This follows polls yesterday that will alarm officials in Brussels, as Euroscepticism remains on the rise in the country and anti-EU parties resurgent. The largest scale protest organized by more than 40 social and political groups voiced opposition to Brussels, as well as the current national government, led by the Eurostop political movement. The march had to be delayed for an hour yesterday morning, following higher than expected turnout. Slogans chanted by the crowd included "Break the European Union" and "Euro cage" and "No to the EU mafia." This follows with a widespread general strike on Friday in Italy, which was orchestrated by key trade unions. We will never be slaves to the banks, to the government and to the EU, protesters at anti-EU march. One protester holding a banner against the euro and the EU told the press, "This is a struggle and there will be no more FDs on the streets. The country's economic and social situation is unbearable." Another said, "We will never be slaves to the banks, to the government and to the EU." They called for the government to reject the EU's demands for Italy to cut back on its budget and also urged politicians to abandon the free trade agreements with the US and Canada. Well, this is not surprising because I think Italy is one of the second countries to actually do a Brexit, to leave the European Union, if there's gonna be any more. But this thing has been sort of spiraling out of control, right? More and more countries are starting to have these anti-EU views because people are starting to realize what the EU is really all about. And remember the guy Sean Monnet I mentioned, and of course this Kalergi guy, but the Sean Monnet had a more relevant quote to this directly, because what the EU tries is to make your European countries into a federation, basically another United States instead of America, of Europe. And of course, people are not very cool with this, because people want their nation, they want nation states, but they have brainwashed us for so long that they think it's time to do this. And they are actually stressed because these are power-hungry fools. The globalists have worked in secret for a long time, along with the banks, that which I really liked with the quote from the protesters. Because the central banks have been really behind this for a long time. Because the globalists are in fact bankers. Most of them. And by working in secrecy, people can't point this out. Like, oh, this is this group, these are these people. No, they have worked in secret. They have tried to keep a low profile. I mean, for example, the Bilderberg meetings used to be completely secret. Now they have a website that's official because people pointed out that they exist. The globalist is a very real thing. It's not a thing I'm making up or anything. It's a fact that they're out there. But of course, people are going to try to shush. It's not about them, it's about people that's angry about politics, etc. Well, of course, people should be angry because there's people conspiring against everyone. And the reason why it didn't work in the past was because they were open about it. But then they realized, well, if we're not open about it, then people won't come and burn our homes. So now we instead are just blinded to look at their pawns rather than to look at the actual puppet master themselves. But regardless, you know this already, so let's stick to the article more, shall we? And in fact, before, the Italians had a vote to actually give their army and power to the European Union. They in fact voted to enter this federation already. But they voted no to that, thankfully. I think it was over 60% that voted no for the referendum, and then a little bit less than that in yes. And who knows if that election was rigged, so the yes voters even got more, because we do know that the globalists loves to rig elections. They try at every turn and cause to do these things, and when they're being caught, well, it's not a big issue, right? No one gets into prison, no one gets any... They don't really get into trouble. They might fire someone if they figure out, oh, this guy is responsible. But otherwise, well, it's like, whatever. I mean, we had 2 elections frauds here in Sweden. What happened to these people? Well, one got fired and the other one I haven't heard of. I don't think they're actually gonna get into trouble, really. One was caught admitting that she and her mother hid the election ballots for the Swedish Democratic Party on Facebook, which is a very stupid thing to do because the internet never forgets. And the second time was this year in the election, again for the Swedish church, which should not have an election in the first place because the church should be the church, but now it's used as a propaganda tool for the globalists. But here again, the responsible maiden, or whatever you're supposed to call her, I don't even remember what she's called in Swedish, her position, but however, she was responsible for what was up there, and well, they choose not to open the packs with ballots they had from the Swedish Democrats at all. But when they were confronted by this, then they picked them up, and the wife of one of the politicians was there at that time, and she saw how they came out with these ballots that was unpacked. And when the guy was called from his colleague that heard that the ballots weren't there, well, when he got there, the ballots were there. And he was the first one of his colleagues to get there. So it's rather obvious that it was a fraud here. No question about it. Both instances. And imagine how many votes they lose during election night, and the ballots are not there for several hours, if at all. And of course, you can always write on the ballot, but if someone would write with the shortcut, like SD, which would be the shortcut, it would not be a valid vote, because you have to write Swedish Democrats in full. And imagine if it's an actual immigrant that wants to vote for the party and have problems typing. Well, yeah, that's sour. But this is no conspiracy theory that the European Union is there in fact to create a federation. This is something I've been talking over in lots of different videos, that they're trying to form an European army, that they're trying to form one currency, and this is the globalist vision, that they will create parts of the world. For example, if we look to East Asia, in the future they will try to make Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, Burma, all of these small countries in the East Asia region into one country that will be next to China, and perhaps they would merge eventually into one. And pretty much the map in George Orwell, something of that. Perhaps there will be more than just 3 nations on that earth. Perhaps there will be 10, but there won't be hundreds. And what happens when you merge lots of cultures into one? Yes, they get spread out, right? Or thinned out, rather to say. Because small cultures can't survive. I mean, I hear arguments all the time. If you're gonna say, hey, you know, if we make this union, it won't be that bad as they claim to be. It will in fact be reversed. So rather than lesser cultures get extinct and hunted down like they were in Nazism, which was a totalitarian ideology that tried to become a giant empire because they wanted to make it monolithic. They wanted to make only one culture. Same thing with communism. I mean, if you look in China, if you look in Soviet Union, if you look at the Islamic states that have been, they commit to ethnic cleansings all the time. languages each and every single year dies. It's not because of nation states. It's because of totalitarian ideologues that refuses to coexist with any other and wants to exterminate any other to spread their ideology through the entirety of the world. And what the European Union is another of these utopian striving big nations that would want to push their agenda onto the rest of the world. But of course, if you remember what George Orwell said, is that these wars that will happen because of these ideologies, they're not there because they actually want to push through them. They're there just to impoverish us, make us weaken, and make us people more submissive to our leadership. Because if you live in peace, well, then you're going to be like the Swedes here in Sweden. You're not going to know what real danger is. You're going to be very judgmental. You're going to be pretty complacent. You're going to feel pretty safe to actually complain on your government a lot more. And, well, or in this instance, to be brainwashed a lot more. But of course, they will demand change in certain aspects, blah, 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 like they had, and try to eat up the conservatism here. So basically conservatism instead, and the only norms that are acceptable is left-wing ideologies. Yes, socialism. They demand now for bigger governments. And in fact, the liberals in Sweden, the Liberal Party of Sweden, in fact pushed through a motion to enter the European Federation and abolish Swedish statehood. That's right. That's right. They did that, in fact. And here I have an article I found. Swedish party passed motion to abolish Sweden. This is from Specia, by the way. Sweden should be abolished as a sovereign nation and instead be part of a European Federation, centrally controlled from Brussels. This is the proposal the Liberals voted yes to at their national convention on Sunday. It was the youth party LUF that had submitted the proposal in the motion. It's time for a federation. The Liberals should take a stand for the European Union to eventually develop into a European Federation. According to the motion, the EU Federation will be something similar to the United States, with its own president and a parliament with 2 chambers. The EU will also have the right to decide on member states, foreign and security policy, currency and monetary policy, environment, and fight against international crime and certain taxes. This is apparent from the motion which was passed by the Liberals, Sweden's 7th largest party, on Sunday. On social media, many liberal profiles rejoice over that the proposal, which in practice means that Sweden is abolished as an independent country and becomes a state governed by Brussels, was adopted. For example, Cecilia Wikström, who is a member of the European Parliament, writes, "The Liberals has now made the decision to work for the EU to become a federation. Finally!" In a debate article in UNT in Monday, LUF President Joar Forsell noted that a federation would have many advantages. For example, the federation could force countries like Hungary to accept immigrants from the third world. Removing some power from individual government is not a question of reducing people's influence. On the contrary, it's about making the EU more democratic, he wrote. Others would simply call it treason. Well, what did I say? What did I say, right? They're trying to reverse the whole thing and say, no, it's not bad. It's in fact reverse. It's better. And how is making a bigger government more free? Considering we don't have the American Constitution, we are not as nearly as free as the American people. I mean, God damn it, you can't even protect yourself. If you actually hit your attacker and hurt him and he would report it, you would be the one that would get the charge. You would be the one that would end up in prison. And he would be the victim in this case, even though you would be attacked. So you don't have a right to self-defense. And even if someone would be in your home looting all of your stuff, you're not allowed to intervene. You have to call the police. And by that time, they could be already gone. And they could have killed your family, and you're not allowed to interact with them if they're inside your home. That's law in Sweden. You're not allowed to do anything. It's a police state. This country doesn't allow you to self-defense. You're not even allowed to have a gun in this bloody country. And yet, we have gangsters that shoots each other up. I mean, I think it was like 2 days ago or something, where 2 guys were riding cars next to each other and shooting with automatic weapons onto each other's cars. One eventually died, thankfully, because hopefully if these people can kill each other off, they can die someday, right? Oh no, yeah, we just keep pouring in migrants. And in this article, they were pretty articulate, right, that they want countries like Hungary to take people in. Why the hell should Hungary take in people? They have their sovereign right to govern themselves, not to be dictated by some unelected European officials, right? Like those in the European Commission. They are completely unelected. They have never won a single election in their entire careers. They have nothing to do with democracy. But yet, we have these crazed liberals that are liberals. Liberals who want small governments. Liberals who want a small government to govern rights, police, etc. Those fundamental things, but nothing more. They want the purity of freedom for people. But this will just put chains on our arms even more. It will be so widespread that we all will eventually have to give up our languages. Because it's not good that people speak Swedish in Sweden, because it makes others feel excluded when they come into the country. So it's far better if we all would speak English instead. So they're going to force us to speak this common tongue that we have developed. And perhaps with all the Muslims we take in, perhaps it will be Arabic. Why don't we ask them what they have planned for us? Of course, they're going to deny this, probably because it's going to be an attack on culture, but you're going to see how they will implement one thing after another. Remember what I told you about Hitler and communism. Communism is radical. They're revolutionary. Hitler's socialism was progressive. They took things time by time, but eventually over 5 years he established a dictatorship, he established collectivism, and many other things, including eugenics, which the communism would also want. And considering how the European Union and Western world hates its own white people, well, I think we will be on the list for this ethnic cleansing, as well as Christians, because, well, in our churches, they're removing our crosses, they're telling that we should invite speakers from other religions to come into our Christian churches, and they also, in fact, invest in foreign mosques. Yes, for example, here in Sweden, we paid for mosque to be in this country, this time, to be built by Swedish Christians' money. And this was voted through, I think in a majority, like 3-17 or something like that, voted through this. And in Great Britain, remember the guy that I showed that said there was some minister that came into the British thing, and he said a lot of things as well.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Friends, Assalamu alaikum. Although I'm now Minister for Justice, working alongside the Lord Chancellor, Jack Straw, who sends his good wishes, I was until 3 weeks ago Minister for International Development. It's also been a privilege working with Islamic Relief, Muslim Aid, Muslim Hands and many others. Come on, a round of applause for the Muslim NGOs. My work as International Development Minister has resulted over the next 3 years with the UK assisting Bangladesh to the tune of £370 million, Pakistan inshallah £480 million, Palestine inshallah £243 million, Yemen in excess of £100 million, not to mention Sudan and Somalia. I'm proud of the achievements of the Muslims of this country from 1997. In 1997 we got our first Muslim MP. In 2001 we had 2 Muslim MPs. In 2005 we had 4 Muslim MPs. Inshallah in 2009-10 we'll have 8 Muslim MPs. In 2014 we'll have 16 Muslim MPs. At this rate the whole Parliament will be Muslim. But you know we've got 4 Muslim MPs, there should be 20 Muslim MPs in Parliament, and inshallah very shortly we'll see that. And I'm confident, as Britain's first Muslim minister, that inshallah in the next 30 years or so we'll see a Prime Minister in this country who happens to share my faith. Today we're showing the true face of Islam. Our future in this country is very bright. Thank you very much.
And mind you, they're quite heavily investors in buying churches, these Muslims, because what do the Muslims do with these churches? Oh yeah, they change the churches into mosques instead. Like 500 was being sold in Great Britain, and I think 480 of them was in fact bought by Muslims and converted into mosques. If people don't think that it's an epidemic with these Muslims, well then they're quite fools. Oh, and by the way, yes, I may have encountered one of those or 2 in the past.
Har ni förstående för andra partier och folk som bara rent generellt är trötta på immigrationsvållandet?
Som man säger, Södertälje är det ju lite... Bor du i Södertälje eller?
Ja.
Ja. Du har gjort det länge eller?
Större delen av mitt liv.
Ja. Samma här. Vi har ju om man tittar i Miljöpartiet-sfären så har ju vi haft en lite annan åsikt än vad många andra miljöpartister har haft. Vi sågs ju nästan ett tag som, jag ska säga, nästan som rasister inom Miljöpartiet, för att vi sa att vi måste göra någonting, vi måste hitta någon annan struktur än att folk flyttar. För då har vi haft den här med ebolagstiftningen, att vi har blivit i Södertälje har vi fått väldigt många som har valt att flytta hit för att man har haft kontakter, släkter och vänner och så vidare. Folk som har fixat svartkontrakt och sådär.
Ja, det är väldigt mycket sånt.
Ja, men det är ju den dåliga sidan, den negativa sidan av det. Men det är ju egentligen har ju inte med invandring att göra, utan det är ju liksom vad vi har för hantering i Sverige utav folk som migrerar hit på olika sätt.
Vi bildar mer och mer getton, verkar det som. Man blir minoritet i sin egen hemstad liksom. Det känns inte så tryggt för många.
Upplever du så?
Ja. Jag är nästan enda svensk i hela stället där jag bor. Så.
Ja, och då definierar du svensk som...
Det är som svensk som bevarar svensk kultur. Det är som, har du respekt för svenska lagen? Det är som det är första frågan. Svensk etnicitet är en annan fråga också.
Får jag säga, det finns väl ingen svensk etnicitet? Vi är ju alla invandrare någon gång.
Ja, men det är väldigt brett.
Så att säga. Det är så migrationen ser ut. Så alltså etnicitet, ja, jättesvårt för du kan vara adopterad. Alltså, jag tror inte man ska ge sig in i den diskussionen.
Okej.
Ingen etnicitet eller religion eller så, utan...
Religion är väldigt viktigt. Det kan även besegra lagar. Till exempel islam vill ersätta svenska lagen till sharia-lag.
Ja, det är inget generellt inom islam. Det finns grupperingar inom islam som vill göra det, men det är inget generellt inom islam som att man vill ersätta det med sharia-lagar. That's not fact.
Har du läst Koranen?
Nej, men jag känner till Koranen så pass väl att det är precis på samma sätt som Bibeln, så är det ju en skrift som...
Sharia-lag gör Koranen till lagbok faktiskt, och det står klart och tydligt att huset av islam, huset av fred, erövrar av huset av krig, ska införas till sharia-lag för att erhålla det kvar.
Men det är ju inte så religionen tillämpas. Och det är ju gudskelov inte så kristendom heller tillämpas, att det tillämpas efter boken, för då skulle det ju inte heller vara något roligt samhälle vi hade. Så det är ju oavsett religion, det har ju funnits med om vi ska diskutera den, men nu tror jag vi hamnar på en annan fråga än
ja, absolut. Men det är bra, det är bara man hör liksom. Men
jag tror att du stänger av nu.
Absolut.
But we're all immigrants, right? That's the rhetoric they have in our ancient homelands that our ancestors have fought for and built. So they would say, there's no such thing as a citizen. That's pure globalism, because we all are immigrants in their vision. In the globalist vision, there are no borders. Borders is essential to a nation. Like Ronald Reagan said, a nation that does not protect its borders is not a nation. It's pure globalism. And this is what they want from the entire world, to move people around. And eventually everyone will be the same. It will become monolithic. It won't be multiculturalism. It won't be any diversity. Everyone will be the same. China will lose its identity. Sweden will lose its identity, which it's already doing. Like the entirety of the West, for that matter. I mean, seriously, even America is losing. Even the good old USA is losing its own identity. And only a stupid motherfucker would say that the USA is on the safe side. Because if you look at Minnesota, it used to be majority Swedish people there, right? It used to be the place known that, oh, here was a place where lots of Swedish people colonized. Well, if you look there in the Christmas market, well, look, it's just Muslims. Muslims, Muslims, Muslims. Especially from Somalia. And the only ones I remember in this clip is that, oh, there's some white people there. Oh, wait, they're Arabs. Says a lot, doesn't it? And this is the good old USA on top of things. But like I said before, Britain have chosen the sea instead of the land because, well, they were forced to make that decision. And that was something that Winston Churchill mentioned about, right? Yes. And of course, now, hopefully, eventually, the Italians will also vote for Brexit. We could always hope that Marine Le Pen would have won and perhaps gotten through the vote to exit the EU. I think the exit the EU vote might be even more difficult than the election. But considering how these socialist/globalist parties are taking in these immigrants and giving them voting rights, they bring in their own demographics. However, like the environmentalist dude I was talking to, yeah, he was a Green Party dude. They're gonna lose their votes in this year's election that's coming up here in Sweden because they will form a Muslim party, and those Muslims within their party will probably vote for that party. Because if I recall correctly, in the Quran it says something about always supporting leaders who promotes Islam and never anybody else. And if these Muslims will be true to their faith, well, then you'll know what will happen, right? They will vote for that Muslim party instead of the Green Party. And they will shrink away. And in fact, it's a quite funny story. They had so many Muslims in their party that when they were to greet their fans or voters, they in fact didn't want to shake their hands because there were infidels and, of course, women who are lesser beings. The patriarchal system of Muslims does not allow handshake between men and women because that will make the man's hand dirty. That's not my interpretation of how you should treat women. That's how Muslims perceive it to be. But of course, the feminists are such valiant defenders of this belief. But regardless, I'm thankful to see that Italy is trying to leave, especially what you see coming from the sea every day. I mean, we have seen the results in Italy, and it doesn't look good when these migrants come on these boats. And same with Spain, and perhaps Spain will also be another. But I really hope that Poland and Hungary, which are very aware of what the Europeans are telling them to do, will eventually also jump on the train out of the European Union. I mean, as long as they can be members of NATO or something, they will be in a defensive pact and they will be secured. They can find different methods of trade agreements. And I understand it can be quite difficult because I think Hungary might be surrounded by land. And if they don't have sea, it might be a bit more difficult to trade. But the thing with the European Union, You remember Catalonia, which may have been a reason that they're in the EU, that they want to leave. They, in fact, had companies scared to stay in the country when they, or well, state or autonomous state in Spain, Catalonia, to stay because they are in fact getting money from the EU. They are getting money through being members of the European Union. And what does this mean? What does getting money from the European Union mean? It sounds good, right? You're getting money to have your business. Well, it's not good at all, because these people are getting so complacent. They're getting privileged. They're just expecting to get money and not to carry themselves up in the business. That does mean that the businesses are not capable of running themselves because they're paying too high taxes, they have too many regulations, and they simply cannot exist. They simply cannot exist. So when they announce that they're gonna leave the European Union, etc., these people don't believe that they're gonna reduce the taxes, etc., which they should if they leave European Unions and all these globalist countries. They could cut the taxes in half. And that would make the companies much stronger. They would be able to recruit more people. And as you cut regulations, it will just simply be far more lucrative business opportunity. And considering how successful Catalonia is, even if they would leave the EU, etc., they could reduce taxes. And they could also, that way, gain businesses. Because it's very lucrative places. It's like Barcelona and stuff over there in Catalonia. And I think they would capitalize on this greatly. I'm not an economics expert, mind you, but I think it's simple math. I mean, if you reduce taxes in half and you have a business, I think you will get more money than getting money from some big government. Living under this, all right, we're entitled, entitlement. We're entitled to get money from the government to have our business function. It's very anti-liberal, it's very anti-democratic, it's very anti-right for that matter. It tells them, the European Union could tell a company, hey, these returning ISIS soldiers, you have to recruit them, otherwise we won't give you your money for your business and you will go bankrupt. And of course the business will be forced to recruit these people. And the European Union could come again and tell them, well, actually we want in fact you to kick all your productive members in your company and recruit these women because we want more women in your company. And then they will be forced to do that. And then they would be able to say, well, we have a crisis in our country with immigrants that we have poured in, and we need you all to pay for it. That is working. And they will increase taxes even more. Because what they want to do? Well, they claim that they want to give people more welfare. They're draining the coffers, but they are not admitting to having any problems. I also interviewed one from the Social Democratic Party, and they were claiming, yeah, economics good, crimes rates are good, etc., etc. And if you have heard my other videos talking about Sweden, yeah, I wouldn't say that's very true, but that's the type of rhetoric they have. It's everything is fine. Our political party has been in power for a long time in this country. And even though it goes to hell, everything is good. Everything is just fine. Don't worry about it. And sadly, my brothers and sisters are buying into this. And of course, they're so anti-Swedish nowadays that they don't even want to see Sweden. And they want to see some, I don't know, Europe. I mean, you see this Merkel taking their German flag and removing it. It's the same sentiments all over the place. And they're going to come with the rhetorics, we're all immigrants, like you heard in that little clip. But that's the sad truth. Because we should be so-called white nationalists. We should want to preserve our blood, our heritage, our race. If we can't admit to these things, that we want to preserve these things, if we don't consider this a worthy goal, then what the hell are you trying to preserve? You who call yourself conservatives. You're not trying to preserve anything. And how many Swedish people are there in the world? Not too damn many. If you look in Sweden, we're so-called 10 million people in this country, right? and lots of illegals. 2 million of those, I think, are immigrants. This is in a general broad term because there's lots of Finnish people, for example, and other people from Europe in this country. So technically, they're white and you would not really recognize, because I'm not some fucking Hitlerian dude that would say, oh, these Polish people, they're Übermensch, and oh, these people coming from Germany, they're not ethnically Nordic like the Nazi party here in Sweden would. But seriously, taking people in from China, taking people in from African countries, taking people in from the Middle East, and they're simply not ethnically white. They're not simply ethnically European. They're not Caucasian, whatever you wish to call it. They're different people. Of course, a person can adopt a nationality, but still, you want the majority to be, in a huge majority, its ethnic statehood. And consider this, would you rather have nationalism or globalism, where everything would become one and the same in globalism, monolithic, and be totally technocratic in the future, like I've talked about, one world government that would embody all nations, and all nations would become abolished, like in this referendum I just read. This is the plot. They don't want nation states. That's why they hate nationalism. That's why they call everything racism. Because remember Kalergi, he was quite clear on this, right? And by reading his quote, the white races of Europe should be destroyed and replaced with a race of Eurasian Negroids who can be easily controlled by the ruling elite. And he's one of the so-called founding fathers of the European Union, as I have told you before. But this is so damn important that people notice. And remember Jean Monnet. I think it's important for you to hear, even though I probably showed you already in the video, that you actually are aware of these real quotes. Europe's nations should be guided towards the superstate without their people understanding what is happening. This can be accomplished by successive steps, each disguised as having an economic purpose, but which will eventually and irreversibly lead to federation. And by irreversibly, he means you cannot exit. Once Sweden would abolish, if they would, because this is just a motion, this is something the liberals have pushed through. It's not something that actually Sweden have voted through in a referendum. It's not something I had any say about, or anyone else for that matter. This was within their political party. But who knows, in the future, this is maybe how they will decide how they should be voting for things. That they will just decide, yeah, let's roll through this, let's enter the European Federation, pretty much like how Britain got into the European Union in the first place. But this time it won't be to get into the European Union, because we are in there, obviously. It's to join this federation. And yes, understand the weight of this, please. Because they are trying to take your freedoms away. This is the ultimate way to take your freedoms away. It's so damn simple. Because your country won't be a country anymore. You won't be able to have any say in your country anymore. You will be in this pretentious United States of Europe that will claim to be this democratic process, etc. I mean, if you look at America, they're the ones trying to rig elections all across the world. I mean, if you listen into Hillary Clinton's private phone calls, you will hear her talking about,
I do not think we should have pushed for an election in the Palestinian territories. I think that was a big mistake. And if we were going to push for an election, then we should have made sure that we did something to determine who was going to win.
and is that democratic that she tries to tell them, oh, let's not get this guy elected, etc. It's just crazy talk. But these things does happen. This might just sound like crazy talk, but these things are happening. But they did in fact hacked an election before in France, and European main member state, one of the most primary countries within the EU, was hacked, and they leaked Marine Le Pen's documents, etc., which had some sensitive information. I don't know if it was criminal, now that I think about what was exactly in them, but anyways, this was very hurtful to her election. And in lots of other third world countries, they rig elections all the time. And it would not be surprising to see if these Americans who loves to say, hey, these people did this. For example, Trump had collusion with the Russians. But it turns out that Hillary Clinton and all of these other dudes, Podesta, etc., they had relations with the Russians with the nuclear deal, where USA gave 20% of their uranium to Russia, to Russian hands. How the hell could that be a good thing? And how the hell could she run for president claiming that Trump had relations with Russia and continuously bashing him for impeachment with collusion with the Russians? I mean, it's having a conversation with the Russians' collusion, obviously to them. But they, in fact, took money. She got like $150 million by making this uranium deal with the Russians into her Clinton Foundation. And she got lots of backing from the Saudi princes as well. If that doesn't spell out corruption for you, I don't know what will. But this is proven fact. However, since she's a globalist, she's pretty much untouchable. So that's why the Hillary Clinton emails, the numerous mysterious suicides, because people all around her tends to die. I mean, her private chef died in the bottom of a lake with his car. Lots of people got hanged for no reason, and even though they had packed like travel bags, they have committed suicide. And by the way, she was a witness against her husband, I think it was. And then we had the two boys that were playing at the wrong place at the wrong time because they saw a plane, which is suspected reason as to why these boys got murdered. And of course we had a guy that had the guards to the embassy leave so the assassin could come into the embassy and left him for dead. So the guards just mysteriously abandoned the embassy, which they are supposed to defend 24 hours a day. And another died in Capitol, which in the wounds was noticed that she was tortured for hours, probably for information. And she was the secretary of a guy that was also going to take a witness stand against the Clintons, but he also got killed. And of course we have the emails, but who cares anyway? It's a globalist, you can't touch these people. But of course she's also a puppet. She's not one of the ringmasters, because presidents and stuff like that, yes, they're puppets. They may be a person in power, but they aren't there by accident. They're there because they had a guiding hand by them all along. So, in other words, they're just pawns. But what would you prefer? A nation state or globalism? Because I think nation states are the most ultimate way to maintain multiculturalism throughout the world, to have this diversity people so much craves. Because mixing people into one country won't work. It was just cause war like they had in India. But remember, in India they had one of the most peaceful revolutions ever in the world's history. And it was by Gandhi's nationalistic movement. They were nationalistic because they wanted their nation back from the imperialistic Brits that slaughtered their people. And Gandhi saw how they slaughtered the Zulus down in South Africa because of their bloody colonies. Yes, their bloody colonies. Who the hell like these bastards who want to move into other people's homes and tell them, yeah, this is our home now. Now you have to do as we say. No. We have our borders. Respect each other's borders. Stay within your nation states. And stay the heck away from this immigration bullcrap, because it's seriously wounding people everywhere. And it's just fueling the globalists. And if you consider, oh, well, my country is ethnically Japanese. Oh, my country is ethnically Saudi Arabic. Just wait and see until these technocrats will come to you. First they will start with the West, and then they will say, see how our Eurasian Negroid race are thriving. Now we have to force this ideology upon everyone else in the world. And well, you will see them succeeding with this. However, I think the strategy they will use will be completely different. It will involve a third world war, but you get the simple picture, right? That they basically have this envisioned for everyone. And by the way, George Orwell's 1984, it was not some damn handbook, it was a warning. But sadly, sick and demented people would use it as such. But a country I have far more relations to than India is Poland. A country that have withstood the Ottoman Empire, that have withstood the Russians, they have withstood the Russian communists, they have withstood the Nazi Germany, they have withstood Prussians, and they had even been conquered by the Prussians for over 100 years, where they weren't even on the map, they weren't a bleep on the map. But through nationalism and conservatism, they saved their faith, they saved their national pride, their belief that there are Polish people, over 100 years of not existing on the map. But after the First World War, they gained their country back. And at the Second World War, so soon again, just 50 years, or wait, I think it was even less than 50 years between those wars, now that I think about it. They lost their country again. And it was by two socialist totalitarian ideologies. So how do we think that this new European federation that is equality seeking like these other two totalitarian socialist ideologies will be any different from any other totalitarian socialist ideology? You remember this Chinese guy Mao? You remember Pol Pot in Cambodia? Do you remember this current existing Kim Jong-un, his family's dynasties rule in North Korea? How free and fair they are to their people, or comrades? Or this Fidel Castro in Cuba? I mean, there's lots of bad examples of socialism, and it is constantly repeating itself. And Poland had even been annexed by Sweden once Sweden was a great nation, trying to extend too far, really. I mean, Sweden had even gone into Russia invading. If that doesn't say how powerful Sweden was back in the day, I don't know what will, because Russia was sort of the crown jewel to conquer back in the day when militaristic oligarchy was in fact one of the more popular political systems in Europe. And the tragedy is that Poland got called extreme right-wing, which our media depict as Nazis, which we know are extreme left-wing. But let's see what they had to say in the Voice of Europe of this march. Poland's March of Independence, a great success, patriotism wins. Tens of thousands of patriots gathered in Poland's capital, Warsaw, today for one of Europe's biggest marches. The festivities were a tribute to 11 November, Poland's Independence Day. The slogan for this year's event was "We want God," 3 words of a Polish religious song that President Trump quoted in July while visiting Warsaw. Trump praised Poland for what he described as the country's defense of Western civilization. We've collected some of the best pictures and videos for you. Well, let's watch this video and see what it was like. Well, as you saw, they stood in actual solidarity. This is what solidarity looks like, not this, oh, we're in solidarity here in Sweden after a terror attack and people are screaming out angry, and then we have all these other liberal fools fighting each other because we don't at all stand in solidarity. And in fact, some people even cheered for the terror attack that happened in Sweden. Yes, people, immigrants here in Sweden, cheered for the Swedish Stockholm truck attack. They were like, Allahu Akbar, and were celebrating. It's sickening to my gut. They were screaming, laughing, like it was a good thing. But this is not globalism. This is pure nationalism. This is conservatism that is keeping the Polish nation alive. And that is why they're thriving. Without terror attacks, they had 0 terror attacks from these Muslims, because they refused to take in Muslims. So why the hell should they take in these Muslims when it's working out so well for them, while we, all the other so-called liberal countries, are taking in so many of these immigrants and having the very negative consequences of it? I mean, Sweden have become the rape capital of the West. Great Britain is the acid attacks of the West, and Germany is the one with most terrorist attacks here in Europe. So how come they would attack these people? How come they would say that these populist movements are hurting? Well, because populists are in fact against big governments, and they are for the little people, and they simply want to remove corrupt politicians like Nigel Farage. He was a populist, but after he won the Brexit vote, instead of continuing onwards, he in fact left his position. He won his war, and he put his gun down and said, you know, this is it for me. I'm not supposed to lead this party anymore, because I have done what I was supposed to do and had promised, and now I have delivered it for my British brothers and sisters, and hopefully sparked the vision throughout the world that we should be independent states. And that's what Nigel Farage did.
Thank you, Mr. President. Freedom, liberty, democracy. Those words roll off the tongue so easily, don't they? Yet we forget how hard they were to win. This debate reminds us how the ideology of extreme socialism leads to poverty, violence, and indeed the loss of that freedom. This debate also reminds us how dangerous is a political ideology that has, as Mr. Timmermans says, the only things that matters are the goals dictated by the state. And yet this debate is being turned as an anti-populist debate rather than concerning itself with the evil of communism. We hear today that populists are the dangerous people. Yet we are not the ones who are trying to forge a new EU extreme ideology of a flag, a council, a parliament and its own anthem on people that don't want it.
So why are the European Union afraid of populists? Why are they keep denouncing them and saying that they're the problems here in Europe for just about anything nowadays? Oh well, yeah. You remember what I told about totalitarian, utopian seeking, striving ideologies and superstates? Yeah, that's because they want to become a dictatorial superstate themselves. So the biggest threat to them would become rebellious people, right? Like populists are. Populists are there because they get popular with the people. And they in fact don't want any big government to rule over them, like dictatorial style. That's why they're terrified of populists such as Nigel Farage.
Not just because you want to close down George Soros's propaganda machine that masquerades as a university. Nothing to do with that. It's because you won't pay the price for Mrs. Merkel's supreme folly and sign up to migrant quotas, and they will never, ever forgive you for it. Surely, when you yourself have said in the past We need to get rid of a utopia called supranational Europe. It must become clear to you, as it became clear to Eurosceptics in the United Kingdom, this set of organisations bound by their treaties are not open to reform. Institutions like this are led by fanatics. They are turning this into a state, and the nation state cannot coexist alongside. Now, you were bold enough to call a referendum on the migrant quotas, and 88% of those that voted agreed with you. Surely logic says it's time you gave the Hungarian people a referendum on whether they stayed part of the European Union or not. Who knows? You might come and join the Brexit club, and then we could fight, for a nation of democratic states working together, trading together, and put this nonsense behind us.
But here's hoping that the other populists in Europe will get their voices heard and echo these ideas into the dormant, sleeping people of Europe. Because I do believe if people would wake up now and do radical changes and just start to actually pour out the refugees that have come here. I mean, for God's sakes, Syria have won now the war against ISIS in their country. They have removed the last city. Of course, there's people still hiding in the mountains and stuff like that, but they have won the war. The refugees can start coming back. Of course, it's going to be hard to come back to Aleppo because the city is in ruin, but it's not our problem anymore, the refugees. It's their own damn responsibility. And perhaps if these cowards that fled here would have some spine and fight and die for their country, then perhaps they would stay in their country. Because you see, I'm living in this ghetto. I've been attacked many times by Arabs. And there are not Muslims here. Most of them are Christians. So it's a general thing from their country to be assholes. And I'm not fleeing, I'm not moving a fin. I'm gonna stand here and speak out. I'm gonna do activism until the day I get a gunshot through my chest and die. Because I'm a patriot. I will fight and bleed for my people before I'm gonna let myself flee. I'm gonna sit here and do everything I can and talk to people, do things, because I don't simply do videos. I go out and do activism. And I refuse to see the ancestors of these lands' legacy to be spoiled. I was born here with a purpose. It is said that we have purposes in our life. Purpose, a destiny, whatever you wish to call it. But I believe that my purpose is to help enlighten people, to help warn people of these damn globalists, this technocracy they're trying to form. And believe me, if a technocracy ever gets formed, there's never a way out of it. Because technocracy is the end of free individualism / common think or whatever. It is the end of free thought at all. Because balance is key. We need groupthink in saying, hey, we're a nation, we are as a people. But at the same time, if you go too much to that route, you will find collectivism. And that is tragically bad, because, well, if one person has it bad, then everyone else is going to have it bad. But individualism says, yeah, I can make the choices for myself in my life, I don't need to listen to others, what they have to say, I can always make my own decisions. Well, too much individualism breeds selfishness. And these selfish beings are actually what's dragging down the West, because, well, it's not my problem, I don't care, I have my own problems to deal with, I don't have to do any activism, let someone else do it. And let that someone else do it mentality is really working out for the little guy, is it right? No, it's in fact just brainstorm feeding these globalists, like the people don't even care about doing anything for their countries anymore. It's so damn easy to push through these corrupt laws without anyone even taking a notice. But also collectivism breeds entitlement, etc. But yeah, but there's far more many things than these things that happens when you go to one extreme or another. But I say balance, because you need to remember that you are a country, that you have fellow men, and that you have to stand together on issues. That we have problems as a society as a whole. But at the same time, we have to remember that we're all individuals as well, and not completely condemned one another's free line of thought or will, but do have common ground with your fellow man. But always to remember your common responsibility for your fellow man. I think if you remember Christianity, it has very common sense 10 commandments, right? If you follow these with some common sense and remember to treat your neighbor right, I think you're on the right path to be a very civilized person. But of course, then again, you remember that interview I showed you and translated with that environmental party dude? Well, that's not very civilized, is it? Because civilized means that even if I and some other person would debate about something all day and be, very frustrated at each other, that we can't really make one or another understand what the other one says or agree with, or whatever you're trying to do in that conversation, is that even though we are friends or and are debating these things, it's not we're gonna say we're not family, we're not friends anymore, but actually, say, yeah, we had perhaps enough of politics for today. Let's go and have ourselves a beer and have some good time and eat perhaps some food, whatever. That's a civilized nation that can handle democracy without shutting other people down. But as you know, the European Union, not so much. But in the meanwhile, this is where I get off.